And he said, okay, pick your life. And I was like, well, if I'm going to Earth, I'm going to Earth. This mission really needs a lot of dense experience. Picking my parents, picking the family line that I would be born into, all the reasons why, and then picking the partners that I would have these experiences with.
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me. I would like to offer a trigger warning before we jump into today's interview for abusive childhood, sexual abuse, drug addiction, and suicide, as those are topics that come up today in our conversation. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get right into the interview. I am here today with Betty Guadagno, and she's going to share with us about her near-death experience. So thank you so much for joining me, Betty.
Thanks so much, Melissa. You nailed my last name. I'm very
wonderful. All right, well, let's get into it then, and maybe we could start with the backstory to your near-death experience and what your life was like growing up and everything that led into that experience.
Yes, let me paint a picture of who I was and tell you about my experience and who I am today. So, yeah, I grew up in a really chaotic, dysfunctional home. My whole family is a perpetual cycle of poverty and addiction and all different kinds of trauma, physical, emotional, sexual trauma. And it's been that way for generations and generations. And that's how my life was. It was contrasted with a lot of darkness. That's not to say that I had like a totally miserable childhood. I mean, like there was happy moments as well. But yeah, the bulk of my experience was very dense. And my parents were both addicts. They taught me how to use, their parents taught them how to use. It's been that way for generations. But, I don't mean that like my parents shot me up with drugs or anything. I just mean that I would see my parents going through some kind of emotion, whether it was joy and elation or despair and depravity. And if they smoked something or drank something or took a pill, they seemed to not feel that way anymore. And so I just made mental notes, and I found out like very early in my youth that if I took something, I could not feel the feelings that I was feeling. And so I really relied on that for most of my adolescence and most of my adulthood. My parents made a decision in 2007 that they were done using drugs, they were done with their suffering, and they ended up committing suicide with one another when I was 23 years old.
Wow.
And yeah, just like completely devastating. My sister was 18. We were just kids, My parents left notes and they didn't really explain much, but they didn't really have to because I was dealing with my own addiction. So I absolutely knew what they were going through. Mm. And in hindsight now, after my addiction had taken a hold of my life for over 20 years, I definitely understand what they were going through. They saw themselves as burdens, and they just could not deal with the physical and mental addiction of being a drug addict. This was like the height of the Oxycontin epidemic. So like my parents were drug addicts because their doctors prescribed them drugs.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it really molded my life in such an insane way, because like after my parents died from drugs, I thought, well, one voice said, you should let go of drugs. They just killed your parents. And then the other voice said, you have to keep using. It's all that you have left of them. And so drugs kind of became my parents. They became like my North Star. They became my compass. And nothing was more important than using. Nothing was more important than trying to medicate this huge wound that I felt inside of myself. I abandoned my sister. I moved across the country. I got married and divorced multiple times. I was looking for anything that I could find just to not feel, whether it was food or men or codependency, just something outside of myself. And my addiction, it changed shape and it progressed many times over the course of my life. I've hit bottom on every substance imaginable, alcohol, prescription drugs, and then getting into the harder stuff later in life. And I ended up overdosing, and I had a very profound spiritual experience in
Mm-hmm.
my overdose. Now, I didn't actually technically die. So it's not really a near-death experience, but it is a near-death-like experience. I have some language for it today. What I experienced was a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. And
Okay.
Kundalini energy is described as life force energy. So in different cultures, people call it different things. In the Western world, you might hear people call it receiving the Holy Spirit. In Eastern philosophy, it's described as Kundalini energy. And so basically, the concept is that you have this energy force inside of you and it activates your chakra system. So we have a spiritual body inside of our human body, or maybe the other way around, depending on how you look at it. And so for me, all of my chakras got opened, activated, and awoken all at the exact same moment. I'm talking about like never having any sort of spiritual sight ever. And then all of a sudden, this rush of energy was opening and activating me. And as my third eye and my crown opened and activated, it was like my soul shot out of my body and went into the space of eternity, the same space that near-death experiencers describe. So I had this experience where I found my awareness starting to go through, I guess I could describe it as like a life review. I started feeling every event in my life happen like in my mind's eye, not only from my perspective, but from the other party's perspective. So I felt my parents' suicide, not only from the huge amount of grief and despair that I felt as the child, but I also felt the experience as if I were them. And I thought that I would never stop crying. I thought that it just felt like every piece of me fractured off into a million pieces. And then I felt every other experience in my life, like I had been the abuser in many people's storylines in my life. It wasn't just like all victimization and addiction. Like there's a lot that goes along with addiction, which is lying, manipulating, stealing, thieving. And so I had caused a lot of harm in my own life. And I felt what that felt like for the other person, like in these situations where I had abused others. And so lots of despair and fear and confusion. And then I started to sort of make my way out of like those low vibrational energies and really go into the space of eternity, which is a vibration of unconditional love. And that's where I remained for the bulk of my experience. And I felt this huge sense of reunion. When I went through all of those like feelings of despair, it felt like every piece of me fractured off. And then I went into unconditional love and it felt like everything was glued together in a way that I had never experienced before. Like I was whole, I was complete, I was home, like this beautiful, beautiful reunion. And I was so happy to be there. And I was greeted by different beings, sort of felt like I was in front of a table. It looked like a card table, just like a crappy plastic table, like that you like see like at a banquet hall. And there was these beings behind the table and they were thumbing through this very large book. And they were just thumbing through it and they were like, yeah, you're not done. You're not done. And I was just so happy to be there. And I was like, well, I'm definitely done. I'm here, And they were like, no, you still have so much you have to do. I see it here. Like I could perceive them thumbing through a book. And I was like, I am definitely not going back. Like I'm home and there's no way that you could make me leave this space. And they said so they started to download me with my mission and my pre-birth plan so that I could understand what my human life was all about. Because when I woke up in the space of eternity, it actually felt like I had woken up from a dream. And so I just kind of like shook my head and I was like, whoa, that was crazy, And I was just so happy to finally be home. And so they took me through this pre-birth plan. They told me that I was a spiritual soldier, that I was sent to Earth on a mission, that I volunteered for it, and that I was here to uplift the consciousness of the planet. And I could perceive the moment of picking the mission in my mind's eye. Everything kind of played out like a movie. So in my mind's eye, I see like this, it kind of looked like a spaceship. It looked a lot like the Gravitron ride that you see at carnivals. And all these souls were like inside this ship. We were all coming out of the sides of the ship. And there was like this commander and we were there and we were signing up for our mission. And it was the most exciting time to be on Earth. And everybody's all pumped. And like all these other spirits are like glowing and like felt like we were all jumping. And it was so exciting. And so they told me that the first half of my life was boot camp. The second half of my life would be carrying out the rest of the mission and that I was here for something divine. And again, very combative. I'm like, cool story. No, so that they take me through the rest of my planning process. And it looked again like a movie, kind of like a video game. And there was this man, he guided me through. We had an empty grocery cart. This man was wearing a fedora and a plaid blazer. And he said, okay, pick your life. And we went through this grocery store, and on the aisles of the grocery store was like these, it looked like cereal boxes. And every cereal box had a life experience on it. And I could see myself kind of like as this spirit. And I was like, well, if I'm going to Earth, I'm going to Earth. This mission really needs a lot of dense experience. And it felt like I had kind of like taken my figurative arm. I don't have an arm in eternity, and I had like just went through the whole shelf and just threw everything in the cart, and, like I shared, lots of dense experiences, sexual trauma, addiction, poverty, double suicide of my parents, picking the family line that I would be born into, all the reasons why, and then picking the partners that I would have these experiences with, and coming into contract with one another in order to complete certain things. And every time I touched a cereal box, I could feel the feeling of what the experience would be like. Now, my spirit is feeling this feeling for literally a split second. Like, okay, this is what a double parental suicide feels like. I can handle that. Throw it in the cart. But like my spirit doesn't understand the concept of time. So it doesn't know that like my human will be experiencing that for decades of time. And that was what it felt like with all these experiences, even coming into contract with other souls. Like, yes, okay, we agree to be these people in each other's lives, but not understanding the concept of linear time. So there was also some things in the cart that I hadn't gotten to in my life yet, like overcoming and recovery, spiritual awakening, being a motivational speaker, being an author, like all of these really beautiful things that I didn't even have the depth of understanding that because my life had been so contrasted. And so again, they show me the pre-birth plan and they're like, okay, so you see now that you have to go back so that you can finish all of the boxes in the cart. You've already gotten through so many. Now you have to go to the light. You got to overcome now. And I was like, this is such a cool story. I totally love the whole plot twist, but like, I am not leaving. I am not going back. I said, somebody else can do it. I see all the other souls that signed up for this great time to be on Earth. They can finish the mission. And so I said, I definitely cannot go back into her. And I could see my body outside myself. I said, she's glitched. She needs way too much healing. There's no way that could ever be accomplished. And they said, okay, you don't have to go back into her, but you do have to go back because you have to finish the grocery cart. Like you have to play all the game. You have to play all of the game. You have to finish it. And so they showed me the baby that I would be born into. And they showed me what she looked like and everything about her, like her stats kind of lined up next to her as I was looking at her. And her charisma level, her personality profile, her adversity, who her parents would be, where she would be born, all of this hardship, all of this opportunity to overcome, her purpose, her mission. And, this baby had a lot of the same life experiences that I had already had, because again, she had to complete the cart that I had filled up as a soul. And she even had some deeper levels of adversity. And I thought, oh man, there's no way that I can start from zero. I guess if this is really my only choice, I guess I'll go back into her. And they said it is. And then as I sort of sifted back into my awareness, they said, trust us, your life will not be nearly as challenging as it has already been. And I just remember saying, I do not trust you. And I came back into my awareness. And, I wrote my whole experience off as drug-induced psychosis because all I knew was that I had taken a bunch of drugs. And then all of a sudden I thought I was talking to God, like I thought I was talking to the creator. And so I just went about my life living it exactly how I was. And then the universe, source, the divine, my guides, they all stepped in this very loud, tangible way so that I could not keep living the way that I was. So a lot of really divine synchronicity started to happen. Like all the drug dealers that I had been dealing with for over a decade, all simultaneously decided to change their lives and stop selling drugs. people that did not know each other. Like I'd call up a dealer, I'd be like, hey man, what's good? He'd be like, listen, I found Jesus. I want to change my life. I want to be a good father. I'm like, okay, bizarre, click. And then I call up another guy and it'd be like the exact same story, but these people did not know each other. And so now I had no way to get drugs. And, like I had a physical dependency to opiates and heroin. And I found myself on day 3 of withdrawal, which is like the worst day. It's the day that like you see in movies, sweating, chills, writhing in pain. It feels like your skin and your bones are on fire. Like they're made of glass and like someone's stepping on it. It's just like the most agonizing pain. And I had this moment of like a spiritual suicide where I thought to myself, like, man, I couldn't even kill myself if I wanted to, because I'm so sick that I can't even get up out of bed and figure out a way to kill myself. And right then I heard this voice and it told me that I could request what I wanted fixed. And I was like in the throes of desperation. I was like, okay, strange voice, I'll bite. Yeah, okay. I want to no longer be physically dependent on heroin. And they told me to lay back, close my eyes, count backwards from 10. And then these 2 little men appeared in my mind's eye, and they had lawnmowers in front of them. And I watched these 2 little men smile and take off in different directions in my mind. And they walked through every crevice of my brain. And as they went through the crevices of my mind, I felt these intense hot tingles. And I just knew that something was happening. And then after they were finished going through the map of my mind, I felt these X's go across my forehead and this plunger on the top of my head. And as it plunged down and came back up, this big, huge flash of white light overtook me. And in that moment, I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of heroin withdrawal. I mean, like moments before, I was sick all over myself, welcoming death, writhing in pain. And then all of a sudden, I was completely well. And so I knew in that moment that my experience in heaven was a true one and not something that was drug induced. And I threw myself on the floor on my knees and I was crying out and I was saying, like, how could this be happening? Like, I don't even believe in this. Like my life was so rooted in atheism because of all of the things that I felt so victimized by. I thought that it was easier just not to believe in anything else. Because if I believed in something else, and I have to believe that something else was making these things happen to me. And so, like my path became, well, almost crystal clear right after that healing. Like I hadn't integrated my experience. So I was very confused. All I knew was that I had been healed. And so I thought, well, if I could be healed, everybody else could be healed too. And so I went out onto the New York City subway system and I like began sermonizing, evangelizing, and proselytizing. And I was like trying to lay hands on like homeless drug addicts. Like, I can heal you, it was crazy. It was nuts. But after that, like I found myself on a train and I didn't really have I didn't have a destination. I was just sitting there and I was so confused. But I was also so elated. I was so happy that I didn't have to use heroin anymore and that there was something bigger than me and it was presenting itself to me. And so as I'm sitting on this train, a man appears across from me and he's wearing a 12-step fellowship necklace. And I hear a voice and it said, "That's your path. Follow him to a meeting." And so that's how I really started my recovery journey. And through some more divine signs and synchronicities, I found myself in a long-term therapeutic community, a long-term rehab here in Brooklyn where I live. And in that space, I was able to integrate my spiritual experience. And, I had like this insatiable thirst for knowledge. Number one, I had to figure out how to be a human without using, because I had never done that before and nobody had ever taught me. So I had to learn how to be a human completely, like from scratch. And not only that, but I had to learn how to be a divine spirit living a human experience and not thinking about it the other way that I had before, that I was just a human, like in existential dread being a human. Now I had like some different insight. So I devoured every sacred text that I could get my hand on. I read every book that I could about metaphysics and the law of attraction. And I began to manifest my reality. And, I was inside of a long-term facility. I ended up staying there for 1.5 years. And which is like a psychotically a long amount of time to stay away. But I really just needed space, just needed time to heal, and I got such a great base in my life with recovery and spirituality. And, you know, like teachers just magnetized to me. Like some man from a Buddhist temple decided to volunteer his time to the facility, like had never done it before, completely random, but he came when I happened to be a client there, and he taught me how to meditate, and he taught me how to pray, and he taught me about the true nature of reality. And I just soaked up everything that he said, you know, and my whole path really unfolded in that space. I got to go to school. I got a job. I got to go to school to become a peer advocate. So I have a job in the recovery field. I'm a recovery coach, which is amazing. You know, like I have a job of service today, and I learned how to be of service to that community that I was living in there. And then it transferred into the communities I found myself in once I left treatment. And, you know, like I belong to 12-step fellowship. I study A Course in Miracles. I also study the Baha'i faith. And I belong to a group for near-death experiencers and spiritual experiencers for the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And, you know, like my life is just so profoundly different. And having this download of the pre-birth plan is really what has given me so much freedom on my journey, because I realized that things have no longer happened to me. They have happened for me, because on some soul level, I have chosen it for the evolvement of myself. And, you know, being able to share my story, this is my most sacred art. This is the story that my soul wrote for this human to experience. And being able to like have all these wonderful platforms to be able to share it on is so amazing, because like I'm really diving into my deepest level of creativity by sharing this very sacred piece of myself. And I'm so grateful for you staying so present while I shared my story. Thank you for letting me share.
Oh, of course, it would be impossible not to. Your story is so inspiring to me. Thank you for being willing to share. I have so many questions I would love to ask you. Maybe we'll start with some questions about the pre-birth plan. And then if we have time, we can get into the healing process. So it's interesting to me that in your memory, you were in a spaceship. I've talked to a few other people who remember being on a spaceship and volunteering to come here. And usually it seems to me like they have a specific mission that they're here for. Do you remember what your specific purpose was?
Yeah, so the download was very loud and clear. And I don't know if it's necessarily specific or like if it's for the lot of us, but the download was, you are here on a divine mission to uplift the consciousness of the planet from a third dimensional level of thinking to a fifth dimensional level of thinking. So like for me, understanding my purpose now, you know, like I do that just by being myself. You know, like I love sharing my testimony. It's a beautiful testimony of transformation and spirituality and spiritual awareness. But that's not always my purpose. You know, like that might not be the way that I help to shift my own level of consciousness from 3D to 5D. Sometimes it's just listening and holding space for other people, you know, but definitely always for me, like my purpose is being of service in whatever way that I can, whether it's just listening or actually actively being of service in some way.
Did you get the feeling that you had lived other lifetimes here, or was this your first?
Definitely have been here for so many lifetimes.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted of it, actually. But yeah, I hear a lot of people that resonate with the idea of the volunteers, which is part of Dolores Cannon's literature.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
A lot of them talk about never being on Earth before. But, you know, like it's so funny when I heard about the volunteers, which came to me like in a very synchronistic way, as all the information that really resonates with me has. I thought, maybe I'm not a volunteer. Like maybe I'm mandated. Is this a punishment? You know, like that's kind of what it felt like for a little while, especially right after the experience. All I wanted to do was go back to heaven. All I wanted to do was go back home. That's it, you know? And I realized through my integration process, thank goodness for that, that it's not about going back to heaven. It's about bringing heaven here. And so I find ways to do that. But I definitely have been on Earth before.
Okay, very interesting. So one thing you mentioned is that you had specifically remember choosing to be the victim in some situations and the perpetrator in others, and not to just single out your experience because I think in some ways we all do that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we all cause each other pain. And so I'm just curious if you were shown what the benefit of those roles would be to humanity.
Yeah. So a lot of it is about transmuting, like not only, my soul's particular mission of transmuting energy in this specific family line and this specific, like for this DNA, for this bloodline, but also collectively. So, and a lot of it is balancing other lives as well. Like, for instance, the man who sexually abused me when I was a small child, in a previous life, I was his abuser in that same aspect. Like, it was some sort of sexual abuse where I was the perpetrator and he was the victim. And so in this lifetime, it was switched around to balance it out.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the situations were very similar, like, this is karma that I am transmuting from other lifetimes, also collectively. Like, in order for me to take on a lot of the collective wounds that we have as humanity, I had to make sure that I was born into a family line of dense characteristics, because this is stuff that happens in lots of families. And so for me, transmuting it in my own storyline, I'm transmuting it for the collective itself.
Wow. That's what I was just going to ask you next, is if in some way when we go through these situations individually, we're transmuting for the rest of humanity in some way, helping to clear that out.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why and it's one of the reasons why I take so much pride and I'm so active in my own healing journey, because I know that it's not just for me. I know that I'm serving humanity by healing myself.
Wow, that's so inspiring to think about that. I mean, it must be something about going so low into denseness and then being able to rise up out of that shifts something.
Oh yeah, it really felt like my rock bottom had a trampoline at the bottom of it, and it was just like outer space. But I've hit a lot of different bottoms in my life, and like spiritual awakening was not waiting for me at the bottom of rock bottom. It was just like despair and depravity, and it would have been like a real slow climb out. And for me, like, the way that my spiritual awakening happened, it was only because like this was the end timeline. Like, this was the last opportunity for me to start to get onto my actual path, like to come on to the next part of the mission. Like, I could have come onto my mission many years before. I've tried recovery many times, but it would have been like a slow, gradual journey of healing. And like, yeah, my human was just like, you know what? Let me just ride this ship all the way into the bottom and then just see what happens.
Uh-huh. Okay. So that leads to another question. How much of this experience is pre-planned, and how much free will do we have here to resist that plan?
That is such a great question. So yeah, I think that free will is a bit of an illusion, but we do have the free will to choose to come here. Now, I have lots of free will in my life because I'm able to take twists and turns. So one way that I really like to think of it is like, I'm an actress, I'm in a movie. The script writer, my higher self, my soul, has already written the script. All the lines are set, all the partners, your co-stars, everything's set, right? Source is the director. There's unlimited budget, unlimited film. You can keep replaying the same scene over and over and over again. So like for me, I'm this method actor, right? Like, I'm here, I'm really taking to the part. I like live in my character and I want to like experience all the emotions and take everything so personally. And sometimes I want to take my will back. So I'm like, oh, you know what? I don't want that partner in the scene. I want that partner in the scene. And my script writer is like, no, we already set the partner for the scene, And I'm like, no, I'm improving. Okay. Like, I'm doing my own thing. I'm picking that partner instead. And I'm going to say my own lines. I don't want to read any of your lines. And again, there's unlimited film, unlimited budget. So like, I can keep replaying the lesson over and over and over again. But if I finally surrender my will and get back into flow with my higher self, my guides, my angels, with source, then the scene plays out the way that it's supposed to. The lesson can be learned and I can move on to the next thing. So I really like that analogy when I think about free will, because yes, I have the opportunity to make choices in my life. Absolutely. But I really feel like in the end, certain lessons have to be learned. I've signed up for them. I can use the analogy of college as well. I picked a certain major, have to take certain classes to get to the major. And so, like I could just mess around and like do nothing, or I can just buckle down and learn the lessons I'm meant to learn.
Wow. Okay, I love that analogy. So you mentioned that after you had your spiritual awakening, I think you said that you became aware that you could create your own reality. And I don't remember if you used the words law of attraction or manifesting or any of that. But my question is, because I awakened to that also with my spiritual awakening and began creating my own reality and doing law of attraction and those things. And eventually it got to a point where I began to wonder, how do I know if I'm trying to manifest or create something, if I'm actually supposed to be doing that, if that's really in alignment with the reason I came here?
Wow. I love that insight. And yes, definitely. I am a student and a teacher of the law of attraction. I manifest my reality. I realize that I've always been manifesting my reality.
True.
My thoughts before were, I'm impoverished, I'm a prostitute, I'm a drug addict, I hate my life. And so that was my reality. And so now my thoughts are different. I'm an abundant individual. I'm surrounded by spiritual community. I have a wonderful home, wonderful career. I am one with the divine, and that's my reality. So I don't know if it's possible. Okay, first of all, I don't think there's any way to mess anything up. You manifest something that maybe wasn't meant for you, whatever. Like there's no way to mess it up, Like really, everything is always working out in divine right order. And I think the only thing that I can say from my own personal experience is that I have attempted to manifest certain things in my life and they have not come to fruition. So I think that when things really aren't meant for you, they will not come to you. And it could be that I'm creating my own resistance, or it could be that it's just not meant for me right now. And I think a big part of manifesting reality is letting go of outcome, which is like the most challenging part of it. Like, okay, universe, I desire this thing and I let it go. Well, like my human doesn't want to do that at all. I want to fix, manage, and control. When is it coming? How is it coming? Like, what should I be wearing when it comes? But yeah, I think that's a big part of the law of attraction. I don't think that there's any way to mess any of this up. And just having that belief really gives me a lot of freedom in my experience.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So you mentioned that we have free will on whether or not to come here. But then in your experience, you were sort of only given a couple options and told basically that you had to come back. So was that because you had already agreed to come?
Yes. That's the way that I perceive it. Like that's the way that it really feels deep within my intuition. This isn't a punishment. I didn't have to come back as a punishment. I had to come back because I signed up to come here. And I signed up for particular reasons, particular things. And like I have to complete the game. It's like you start a game, you have to finish, So whether or not I finished inside of this human that I came back into, or I had to start over in a new human, I had still signed up for particular lessons and particular experiences, and they had to be experienced. So I don't think of it like I'm not punished by having to come back, this is, and yeah, my free will was already utilized when I signed up for the whole mission to begin with.
Right. Okay, one more question on this topic. I don't think I've ever asked anyone this, but when you were in your experience and you were shown the other life that you could have chosen to go into and start over, I'm just curious about how those lives are chosen. Are they chosen because there's already through cause and effect, there's going to be a person born into that experience, or do the guides put those together because they fit what you would need?
That's a really good question. I'm tending towards the former. So I know that for me in this lifetime, I feel like the reason why I was born into the family I was born into was because all of these situations needed to be felt and healed. And this family line already had all of that. So I was like able to pick a set of parents that I knew that this would be like what my DNA was made of, and like the experiences that I would have inside of that family line. And I think the same thing for the baby that I saw. Like she had a lot of the same experiences. And there's a soul somewhere who hopped right into that mission. It wasn't my soul that decided to go into that baby, but definitely another soul did. And I think about that all the time. But yeah, I do believe that, and this is just my personal belief. I don't have anything like written in stone or anything. And like, reality can change all the time. But I do think that, yeah, these avatars are kind of already set up to have those experiences within them.
Thank you so much for explaining that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your healing journey. I'm sure there was a lot involved with that, having to go back and alchemize all of those really heavy experiences that you had as a child.
Yeah. So a lot of my healing journey has to do with, like I have very devout faith today.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this belief, because of this pre-birth plan, it was like, yeah, 2 tons of garbage was just like released from me. So that really helped a lot in the healing. Seeing that I had chosen all of the experiences with the partners that I experienced them with, it was kind of like, oh, well, how can I hang on to a resentment when I see that I chose it? But at the same time, like my spirit might understand that, but my body does not. My body has still endured a lot, and a lot of healing needed to be done to my physical vessel. So some of the tools that I used in my healing, like of all of, my past, my present, my future, I did a lot of shadow work, and that's a term that you'll hear a lot in the spiritual community. It's basically embracing the dark and recognizing the light. And so for me, I do a lot of character development around my shadow. I've given every piece of my shadow names, faces, personality profiles, outfits, like they all have they're their own people. And it helps me to distinguish that they are not me. So for instance, my addiction, he has a name and a shape. He's a man. His name is Richard. And he comes with me on my journey. Like I have to keep him arrested. Like he lives inside of a glass house inside my mind, because if he has center stage, then I'll end up using again and I'll get knocked off course. Mm-hmm. But I can't banish him because he is a part of me. And so I just keep him with me, and we communicate. What do you need? What kind of attention do you need? I can't give you what you want. I know that you want to use drugs. I can't give you that. Nope. You can't have any alcohol. I hear you, but I can't give you that. But I can give you my time. I can give you my attention, and we can spend some time together. And a lot of other things manifested in my life after, letting go of the drugs. Like I developed a lot of really nasty eating disorders, because the problem really at my core is that I don't want to feel my feelings, because I don't think that I can handle them. And so I'll just grab at anything that I can. And so I had to do character development around all the different forms of eating disorders that manifested too. They all have shapes and names and faces, and yeah, the same technique, like I cannot banish you. I will not kill you. You are a piece of me. You think that you're protecting me from something. So let's find out, what is it that you think that you're protecting me from? And, like there's, just like regular forms of therapy that really dive into this kind of work as well. Internal family systems, parts work. They disconnect the pieces of ourselves so that we can kind of label them and see that they're not us. And I also did all that same development around my light. I had to get to know my most authentic self, like that was a beautiful opportunity for me to design her. When I came into the healing process, at first, I was totally overwhelmed, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm 35 years old and I don't know who I am. And then I switched the thought and I said, wow, I don't know who I am. That's so cool. I get to figure it out. And I get to be conscious while I do figure it out. And so I got to try tons of different things, different forms of spirituality, different kinds of meditation, like hobbies, creativity, like exercising all these pieces of myself. And I got to design the most authentic version of myself. And, she's still a work in progress. I'm still designing her as I find more things out about myself. But definitely compartmentalizing and separating the different pieces of myself so that I can see that at my core, I'm nothing more than just a divine spirit of unconditional love. But I'm here having a human experience, and there's all these facets to my human. And so I like to give them all sort of their own space.
Wow, that is so helpful. So I remember you mentioning that you discovered A Course in Miracles, and I'm actually a huge fan of A Course in Miracles, and I would love to hear how that's impacted your journey.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. A Course in Miracles is probably like the teaching that really resonates the most with me. And it's impacted my journey in so much. So, A Course in Miracles is a metaphysical text, it's a channeled message from Jesus, and it's channeled through the mind of a militant atheist psychotherapist from Columbia
Of
University in
course.
the 1970s. And like it to me when it's actually right next to me, but when I got the course, I thought, oh my God, this is a handbook for the recently deceased. Like just like in the movie Beetlejuice, I was like, it reads like stereo instructions. Where's my caseworker to help me like understand what this says, you know? And I really thought that when I finished reading this book, that I would ascend and I would get to go back to heaven. And I read this when I was in treatment, and I lived in a bunk bed for a year and a half, and I was getting to the last page, the last paragraph. I laid down in my bunk bed, I took off my shoes, and I was like, this is it, I'm going home. I was completely convinced that I would actually leave my body, and I got to the last word and nothing happened. But I had a lot more information. And inside the Course in Miracles, there's a workbook, and you do a lesson a day. And the first couple of weeks of lessons, they really spoke to me. It talks about how I don't know what anything is for. Like, I don't know what this chair is for. I don't know what this body is for. I don't know what this wall is for. And it just really helped me understand that, like I live inside of a dream. This is the dream. I remember waking up in heaven and thinking that this was a dream. And this book, it solidifies that belief for me. And like I can either live in a nightmare or I can choose to live in a happy dream. And today, just for today, I pick the happy dream. And it's a moment to moment thing. Sometimes I like living in a nightmare. I'm real used to it. So I get a little addicted to my suffering and I want to go back to that space. But I do consciously, attempt to live each day in a happy dream. And for me, like, yeah, it really comes to fruition when I get to be of service to other people.
That's beautiful. Would you like to share a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So I work as a recovery coach. Basically, my whole job is just self-disclosure. I say, hey, I'm in recovery. If I can do it, you can do it. And they pay me money for that. It's wild. I work at a clinic in East Harlem in New York. And, like, I feel like I'm here to plant seeds. I haven't seen any of my seeds come to fruition, and that's okay. Like, I wish I had like this whole long laundry list of success stories, but sometimes it's just a success to like wake up in the morning and just
Oh,
keep
yeah.
on trucking. You know what I mean? Like just keep putting one foot in front of the other. My story is obviously very transformational when it comes to recovery. And I wish that for every person who has, like some issues with addiction. But that's not always the case. And I have a podcast for the International Association for Near-Death Studies. It's called Explore the Extraordinary. That's really beautiful because I get to like give space to other experiencers, like what we're doing right now, like holding this space for each other. Like, to be interested in learning from one another, putting pieces of the puzzle together with one another. And I'm so thrilled for that opportunity just to be able to hold space for other people. And yeah, like I'm in the process of writing a book, and I have like just so many amazing things like in the works, just by doing the next right thing. I'm not doing anything fancy. Like I literally cannot even explain to you who I was before, because like there's just no words in the human language to explain what kind of depraved animal I was. But just by continually doing the next right thing and just putting one foot in front of the other, my life has manifested into something that I could have never even dreamed for myself. And if that's possible for me, it's literally possible for anybody. I mean, like truly, really.
Wow. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing. Your story is so inspiring, and I'm so thankful that you're here, that you came back to do this work, even though it's incredibly intense here. So thank you for everything. And would you like to share with the viewers where they can find you?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for the space that you've created. I'm on social media. My handle is Buddha Betty on Instagram and
I
YouTube and
love it.
Facebook. Yes. And so please feel free to reach out to me, whether you're interested in recovery or spirituality, or you're looking for community or just a friend to listen. Like, I'm completely here and available for you. So thank you so much for this space.
Of course, and I'll have those links in the description. Thank you so much, Betty.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. If you'd like to support this channel, I've shared the link to my Patreon in the description box where you can get benefits like behind the scenes of this podcast, early ad-free access to interviews, and a monthly live stream Q&A with me. I've also shared the link to my free Discord community, which I've just started and I'm very excited about, where I share free resources and a bunch of channels and forums where people can connect and grow spiritually together. You'll also find the link to my website, lovecoveredlife.com, where I share my paintings, my TikTok and Instagram at Melissa Denise, and my clips channel, where I share shorter clips of my podcast episodes. Thank you for watching and thank you for your support.